Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Sana Hashmi. I work at Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation, and I'm based in Taiwan. So my area of expertise is China and Taiwan for foreign policies, and I write Print's weekly column, Eye on China. So this week's column is on the much anticipated and much talked about Xi-Biden summit that happened on the sidelines of the APEC summit last week. The visit was crucial for a number of reasons. First, it is the most consequential relationship in the world, and the deterioration in the relationship have repercussion on the global geopolitical as well as economic landscape. Second reason is that this was Xi's first visit to the US in 6 years, and it was only the second meeting with Biden since the latter assumed the presidency in 2020. Then the third reason would be that in the past couple of years, we have witnessed the downward spiraling of the relationship. And this visit was necessary from the perspective of stabilizing the relationship and put in place mechanisms to avoid any miscalculation, particularly in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So the visit took place without major hiccups, and I feel that this was one of the most successful achievements of the visit. It was heralded at least as satisfactory, if not successful, by the watchers of China-US relationship. And I feel it could be regarded as successful because it took place, and we did not really see any word of war happening. So the most peculiar thing about the visit that, as expected, it was highly choreographed. It seems that each and every move and even words were orchestrated and pre-decided in order to avoid any diplomatic fiasco. Then the expectations about the visit, about the outcomes and deliverables were actually kept at minimum. So the idea, at least from the US side, was the successful conclusion of the visit and the resumption of military to military dialogue. And in my opinion, the US definitely got what it aimed for before the visit. But if we talk about China, there has been a visible willingness to resume high-level dialogue with the US, and this willingness has been visible at least since the start of this year. Of course, if we disregard the entire Chinese spy balloon incident that happened in February that led to the cancellation of Antony Blinken's visit to China. So two important signs of China's willingness to resume dialogue with the US have been: first, the flurry of visits and exchanges between China and the US officials. This is something that we have been witnessing specifically since April this year. Then the second is the toning down of the wolf warrior diplomacy from the Chinese side. In fact, the Chinese media, particularly in the English language, they have been coming out with a number of positive commentaries on the current state of US-China relationship. And this is something that we have not been seeing specifically from the Chinese media side. So this is I would say that this is a new development, and this is very much linked to the willingness of the Chinese side to restart high-level dialogue between US and China. Then the officials and the state-owned media, Chinese state-owned media, they did regard the summit as successful and in fact as a victory. This coupled with Xi's somewhat projected positive attitude in the US, at least relatively, if we compare Xi's attitude in the US with the last year when he was attending the G20 summit in Bali, I would say that Xi's attitude was very positive in the US. And I feel that that demonstrates that China is definitely willing to stabilize ties with the US. Of course, there are domestic reasons for that. China is trying to deal with the economic slowdown as well as rise in unemployment within the country. So, of course, it really doesn't want to have tensions going on with the US. So this was just an attempt to at least try to stabilize the relationship. But this is projecting what both the countries want to convey to the domestic audience. But in the US case, it was also about conveying to its allies and the partner in the Indo-Pacific that the US is trying to manage tensions with China. And in fact, trying to also include China within the very controversial Indo-Pacific when it comes to establishing coalition to contain China, and how China feels and Chinese officials and ministers feel that China has been excluded and targeted by the so-called like-minded countries. But in assessing the visit, I would say that it was, of course, as an overall orchestrated visit. But I would also say that the US actually got much more than what China got. US actually achieved more in terms of what it set for, and definitely China paired somewhat weaker. And there has, when we talk about the US achievements with respect to the visit, of course, there has been the resumption of the high-level dialogue. This is something that the US has also been trying to focus on. And more importantly, the military-to-military communication has been restarted, which was suspended by China after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August 2022. So while the Chinese officials portrayed it as a huge success, uh, if we look at what the Chinese social people on Chinese social media are talking about, they kind of remained a little pessimistic about the prospects of the relationship in the near future. So there is a prevalent view that the US won't readily accommodate China's rising economic and military status. And this is something that would be a deterrence in the long-term prospects of the US-China relationship. And if you look at the developments, I do feel that the reality is not that far from the discourse that is happening within the Chinese social media. So there has been recurring patterns of conflict. There has been blame shifting both from the US as well as Chinese side. So I feel that this summit is also could also be construed as short-lived truce between US and China. But there is a high probability that we would see that there would be an inevitable return to conflict. So it is apparent that this one summit is not going to reset the US-China relationship. It is not drastically going to reshape the dynamics between China and the US. We know that the fundamental differences between US and China, specifically on the issues of the South China Sea and Taiwan, the freedom of navigation, they still very much there, they still exist. So to conclude, I would say that the summits like these are very important, but they're also just temporary measures to manage relationship and avoid any kind of miscalculation. And of course, the miscalculation, the possibility of miscalculation in the Taiwan Strait was very high. So in that aspect, I would say that it was very important. But if we talk about the lasting impact of these interaction exchanges, I would say the capacity to forge a lasting resolution to the hostilities that have been going on between the US and China remains very, very constrained. And also, this depends on the nature of the US-China great power rivalry, as in a summit is just not going to resolve the issues and the differences that have been there for a long time. So the China-US relationship, I would say that still remain delicately balanced. And I would say that if there is any single point of contention there in the near future, it's definitely going to take the US-China relationship again into a phase of entrenched hostilities. Thank you.